Good morning. Good morning. It's January 10th, and this is my Sunday school class. We are looking through the book of Genesis. We are in chapter 21. I am I have too many things open on my desktop. Open recent Genesis 21 part 2. Last week we were talking about the birth of Isaac, right? We're talking about the birth of Isaac. Isaac, his name means he who laughs, or just laughter, he who laughs, right? And we talked about three different types of laughter. Abraham and Sarah had the laugh of disbelief, not unbelief, disbelief. Like, I can't believe that. I'm 99. I'm going to have a child. It's hard to believe. It's like, wow, when somebody tells you something, it's just hard to believe. Sarah later had the laughter of joy, like, oh, God did it. It came to pass. that laughter of relief and joy because it's actually happened the way God said it was going to happen. But Ishmael, his brother, who's 14 years older than him, uh, who had been the man of the house for 14 years, who's forever, as far as anybody else knew, he was going to be the one who's going to inherit everything. God waited 14 years before he told Abraham, oh, by the way, it's not Ishmael. You're going to have a child. It's going to be Isaac. And he laughed. Right? Ishmael is rightfully confused because of what he was told and then what's actually happening in front of him. Now, this child's born, and we think that the scene in Genesis 21 takes place when he's about 3 years old, when Isaac's about 3 years old. And Ishmael laughs at Isaac, but in a way that disturbed Sarah. So people have different opinions on this. Oh, it wasn't really, but it was something. It was something. It wasn't the laughter of someone trying to tease and make a baby laugh. It wasn't, oh, I accept you and I'm so happy for you and I'm just going to make. It wasn't that kind of laughter. It was the kind of laughter like, ha, you think you're going to take this from me? I don't think so. And so Sarah was rightly upset and said, you, Ishmael and Hagar have to leave. And so um, if Sarah had been wrong, then Abraham might have, God might have told Abraham, don't listen to Sarah. They need to stay. But God said the opposite. Do what Sarah's saying. Plus, I've got Hagar. I've got Ishmael. They'll be fine. So we left the story when Abraham loaded up Hagar and Ishmael with what he could give them with water and gave them a bunch of stuff. And Ishmael, I mean, Hagar puts those things on her shoulder, interestingly enough. Um, Ishmael's about 17 years old at this point. So if you read the uh, Hebrew, you can't tell if she put Ishmael on her shoulder or not, but he's 17. So we can just use she did not do that. So we don't have to be confused. But she put this stuff on her shoulder and she was in charge of rationing it out as they went into the desert. And in the desert, they run out of food. They run out of what Abraham has supplied, right? And so they're empty. And I'm emphasizing that because man can just give you so much, right? And so they run out of what Abraham has supplied. And Sarah's at the point of collapse because they're empty now, which is kind of exactly where God wanted them. So we'll just start from where we ended up. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, it says, so Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and put it on her shoulder. He gave it and the boy to Hagar and sent her away. So he didn't hand, anyway, he gave her all the supplies that he thought they would need to make it out of the desert. And it was a desert. It was Saudi Arabia is where they're basically heading as on their way to Egypt. Okay, so then she departed and she wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. It wasn't called Beersheba at that time. They named it a little bit later, but she's wandering in the wilderness, and the people who were reading it at this point, it's called Beersheba. So he just says they're in the wilderness of Beersheba, but that's not what it was called at that time. So they're in the wilderness and they're wandering, trying to find their way out. There are no stop signs or arrows pointing. I can have all the arrows and sign, and I'm still like, wait, where are we? So you can imagine where you're just seeing sand and nothing. Which way do I go? So they get to the point where they've run out of their rations and they don't think they're ever going to find their way out. And it says, verse 15 of Genesis chapter 21 says, and the water in the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. So he's in shade, he's under a tree, and she places him there and go to sleep, take a nap, because she's thinking, this is it, we're about to die. Verse 16, then she went and sat down across from him about a distance of about a bow shot, for she said to herself, let me not see the death of the boy. I just can't, I can't take it. So that's how she dealt with it. You know, somebody, well, I would have sat there and rocked him while he died. Well, she couldn't bear to watch him die. So she sat him in the shade. She actually wanted to die first. I'll sit over here in the sun and let me die first, but I just, right. So she sat opposite him and she lifted up her voice and she wept. Now, I read you a verse where it was Elijah is in the same situation, thinking his life is going again. He's in the same desert, even though he's just done this miracle. And in Sarah's case, God had spoken to her when the boy was born and said, I'm going to make him a mighty nation. But it didn't look like that to her. That's why the Bible says we walk by faith and not by sight, because sometimes what we're looking at, this looks like it's all going to fall apart, and this looks like I'm going to pass out, and this looks like I'm not going to make it, and we can't go by what we see. Because God sees something different than what we see. So we just keep holding on to his hand. It doesn't matter what the circumstances look like. If God's spoken to us and said something, he's going to do it. God's not guessing or hoping, ooh, I hope that works out. Fingers crossed. God's already seen tomorrow. He's already seen 20 years from now. So he already knows the end. So if he says, go over there because it's going to work out. It doesn't matter how it looks like. So anyway, she's in the desert. She's weeping because she's forgetting what God said, which is what we do. Elijah was in the same situation. He had just called down fire from the sky and killed all the prophets of Baal. And then Jezebel said, well, you know, I'm going to kill you now. And that made him crazy. And he, oh no, it's Jezebel. She's bigger than God. And so he's running. In 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 3, it says, and when he saw that, he arose and ran for his life and went to Beersheba. So he goes to the same desert on purpose, like they can't track me here because it's desert and they won't find me, which belongs to Judah. So it's in that part of Israel, right in the southern tip. And he left his servant there. So he went to the city of Beersheba. Then it says, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. And now he's in the even worse part of Beersheba, this area. He's in the wilderness, so he's exactly where Hagar and Ishmael had been hundreds of years earlier. It says, and he came and he sat down under a broom tree. So he's also sitting under shade, probably near where Ishmael was, or maybe the same spot. And he prayed that he might die and said, it is enough now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my father's. Like, just kill me. Then as he lay and slept under the broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. So he's thinking, there's nothing. God slept in. And he was like, hello, look, right over there. I got food for you. I got here before you, God, and already had this food prepared for you. And that's what's exciting, is that God has already been, every day, like this day, God's already been here and he's already left what we need for us in this day. We just have to open our eyes as opposed to closing them and, oh no, it's all over. So anyway, so Hagar is in the same situation. And in Genesis chapter 21, verse 17, it says, and God heard the voice of the lad. So he kind of ignored her voice because he'd already spoken to her. And her tears was not what God needed. It was the lad. The lad is the one who was mocking him and saying, you're not going to be the head. I've been the head. Because he'd been the head of the household. He's now 17. And suddenly this baby's going to take over. So he's making fun of him. And he needed to repent. Because if God said it's going to be Isaac, it doesn't matter what it looks like to us. God picks certain people to do certain things. And we may look at them and say, you'll never be able to accomplish that. You can never do this or that. But God knows what they can do. So Ishmael needed to repent. So he says, I've heard the tears of the lad. Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, what ails you? Like, why are you upset? I already said I was going to take care of him. Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. And that's what he was waiting for the lad to empty himself of his arrogance, empty himself of his anger, of his jealousy, because somebody else can get something. That doesn't mean God doesn't have anything for you. It's not like there's one piece of pie, and if he got a big piece, you got to get a little piece. God has an unlimited pie that we can all get some. So we don't have to be upset at how God is blessing other or when he's blessing other ahead of us. God, I've got Ishmael taken care of. Don't even worry about it. So in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 30, this is one of the last verses I read last week. It says, when you are in distress and all these things come upon you in the latter days, when you turn to the Lord your God and obey his voice, for the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not forsake you nor destroy you. So when you turn to him and obey his voice, he will deliver you. Okay, so Genesis chapter 21, verse 18, he says to her, arise, lift up the lad, hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation. So you can go ahead and hold on to him, because she had let go of him, right? Like, I can't take it. I don't want to even look. And we close our eyes at what we're anticipating is going to happen. And God's saying, you can't anticipate what is going to happen. You don't know what I'm about to do. Open your eyes. Take a hold of the situation. You don't have to close your eyes. I'm going to make him a great nation. And so God has provision for us. God has something for us, right? So Genesis chapter 21, verse 19, here's where I'm really starting. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. Now, the well of water had been there, but she didn't see it, right? And God didn't reveal it to her until she had totally emptied herself of everything that Abraham had. That's why she was upset. Abraham gave me all this stuff, and now it's gone. Well, okay, so man can give us stuff, but God has an unlimited supply. And as long as we're depending on what man is doing, when it runs out, we get upset. Oh no, my check is gone. This is bad. It's like, okay, that particular source that God was using, it may have dried up, but God hasn't dried up. God is God's not stopped when man's resources dried up. He'll just open up a well somewhere else. And that well had been there. She hadn't seen it. And our deliverance is always there. We just don't see it sometimes because we need to empty ourselves. And that's what I want to emphasize here in this wilderness. Until they had emptied themselves of everything that Abraham had given him, until the lad had emptied himself of his anger and his jealousy and had repented, they couldn't see what God had for them, right? For example, in Numbers chapter 22, verse 31, Balaam was on his way to do bad things, and God kept trying to stop him, but he wouldn't, he wouldn't stop. He kept ignoring the warning signs, and that's what we do. You're trying to drive somewhere and then get a flat tire. So, you fix the tire, you keep going, then you run out of oil. So you put oil in it, and you keep going, and then the engine blows up. So you call an Uber, and you keep going, and then the Uber driver, gets in a fight and says, "Get out." And you think, maybe I shouldn't go, because God, but I'm determined, and some of us are that way. I'm gonna keep on going. I'm curse the devil. Yes! But sometimes it's God, and we're fighting against God. You're Jacob wrestling with the angel. So Balaam, God kept trying to stop Balaam. He wouldn't stop. And so Numbers chapter 22, verse 31, it says, then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand, and he bowed his head and fell flat on his face. Oh, that's why the donkey won't keep going. The angel of the Lord is here. And so, sometimes God finally opens our eyes. That's like a theme in the Bible, where God's already there doing something, we just don't see it. When Elisha was, now this is Elisha, not Elijah. Elisha was being chased by a huge army, right? And he's running with his servant, and they get to a point where they don't know where else they're going to go, and the servant freaks out. Oh no, we're there. In 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 17, it says, and Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. Then the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So God already had an army there ready to fight the other army. It was no problem. we freak out because we can't see God's provisions, but they're there. And if we could just open our eyes instead of closing them out of fear, God will show us what it. And even if we don't see it, we have to trust that it's there. God has already been there. He already had an army there. Just like with the Hagar, there was already a well there. In Luke chapter 24, when the disciples finally had gone to the tomb. Now the women went there first because that's how that is. So the women's we're going on, but the men are like, oh no, it's all over. The Messiah is dead, and they're whining. And the women came back and said, hello, I think you need to go check this thing out. So they went there, and it was an empty tomb. And they're walking back, so oh, I wonder why that tomb is empty, forgetting everything that Jesus had said. And so suddenly this man starts walking with them and starts talking with them. And he's trying to explain, well, maybe the Messiah this and maybe the Messiah. And fortunately, they didn't just shoo this man away. And in Luke chapter 24, verse 15, it says, so it was while they conversed and reasoned that Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were restrained so that they did not know him, because they're still trusting in what they know. Well, that doesn't make any sense. They're trusting in everything. So our eyes are closed and restrained when we're trusting in our own knowledge, when we're trusting in what we can see and feel and taste and touch, and we're not trusting in God, right? So they couldn't see anything because they're still like confused, and Jesus is with them, and Jesus is with us. They're talking to Jesus. They don't know. Okay, so now it came to pass in verse 30, it says, it came to pass as he sat at the table with them, that he took bread, he blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. So they invited Jesus to dinner, not knowing it was Jesus. And then it says their eyes were opened and they knew him. And then he vanished from their sight. And they went, oh, he's been with us all along. Yeah. And then we could take that lesson. Oh, God's been here all along. He's been here all along. What was I panicking about? That was God. It was that stranger I picked up, or that person who said that to me, or to let me know that he's here. And if we could know that, we would stop the whining. Okay. So she opens her eyes and she sees the well that had already been there. And she says in Genesis chapter 21, sorry, the second part of verse 19, it says, and she went and she filled the skin with water and she gave the lad a drink. So God was with the lad, and he grew and he dwelt in the wilderness, and he became an archer. So he dwelt in the wilderness. He stayed there in the Saudi Arabia area, and Ishmael and his generation after him and generation have stayed in that area ever since. And they like them some wilderness. They don't have a problem in the desert. There are people, the nomads, they just cover themselves with a little thing and the towel, and it's not a towel, but and they like the desert.
Racist.
Yeah, see. And so his people grew there because that's where he was delivered. They feel comfortable there. They feel the presence of God there. Other people are scared of the desert. They are not. So it says he dwelt, verse 21, he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran. And so that's what some people called it, and this became the well of Beersheba. So that area is called the wilderness of Paran. It's mentioned a couple more times, the wilderness of Paran. So I just want to park here for just a little bit, talk about the wilderness of Paran and what the purpose of it is. God will lead us into the wilderness sometimes so that we can empty ourselves of our ideas, of our expectations, of how we think things should go. Sometimes of our unforgiveness. He drives us so that we're empty, right? And he wears us out in the wilderness of Paran. Here's a couple more times where the wilderness of Paran is mentioned, where God purposely led them to the wilderness of Paran. In Numbers chapter 10, this is after the children of Israel have come out of Egypt. God has said, I want you to go to Mount Sinai and worship me. And they complained the whole time, even though he just delivered them from bondage. They, please, Lord, deliver me from that. So the God does, and then you complain. And then he opened up the Red Sea. He killed their enemies. But it wasn't what they were expecting when they crossed to the other side. And so God had to empty them of their expectations. When they got to the mountain and God said, here's what I'm going to do, they said, no, you're not. He said, no, I'm going to come down upon you. They said, no, you stay there. Moses can talk to you. We're going to stay here. You stay on your side. I'm going to stay on my side. And so God had to empty them of that idea because they had too many Egypt habits that they had picked up. And so, and we have too many worldly ways of looking at things that we pick up. And so God has to empty us sometimes. And so he leads us into the wilderness. So after Moses gives them the 10 Commandments and said, let's just start over. I need you to start over. He builds them a tabernacle. Or he tells them to build a tabernacle and his presence comes down. He says, so if you don't want me to personally come down to you, at least we'll send a priest into the tabernacle and he'll communicate with me. But I want to make you a kingdom of priests. But right now you're drawing back. So I have to empty of you of that desire to draw back from me. So in Numbers chapter 10, verse 11, it says, now it came to pass on the 20th day of the second month in the second year, after that Mount Sinai experience, that the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle of the testimony. So he built them a little tabernacle and they camped there for a couple of years while God was trying to train them that it's okay, that his presence is okay. And he's trying to get the Egypt out of them, right, and empty them. And verse 12 says, and the children of Israel set out from the wilderness of Sinai on their journeys. And so they're following a cloud. And it says, then the cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran. So he takes them from Sinai to Paran. So from Africa, now they're in Saudi Arabia, because that's the place of emptying. It says, so they started out for the first time according to the command of the Lord by the hand of Moses. So this is the first time they're actually starting to listen to the Lord. So the wilderness experience was supposed to empty them so that they could just, okay, we're going to follow God's command instead of our commands. Next chapter, Numbers chapter 11, they start complaining again. Because again, we have expectations of what we think God is supposed to do. You can hear them in our prayers. Lord, I want you to come right now. And I want you to touch this and do this and that. We do. Jesus did that one time. He says, Lord, if it be thy will, take this cup away from me. And then he said, but it's not my will. It's your will. So it's okay to have something that you would like, but it's not okay to hold on to it. We have to immediately say, but it's not my will. It's not how if I was in charge, Lord, I would give myself a 75-inch color television right now, but it's not my will, it's your will. So I'm gonna let go of that, So it's okay to want something, but it's not okay to hold on to it and use it to hold God hostage and say, well, God, I need, you're gonna have to do this for me. So he empties of us of our expectations of how we think things should go. So the people did not empty. They kept complaining to Moses, right? Moses, you should do this, and we need water, we need that, and how come God? And so in Numbers 11, I read this last week, chapter Numbers 11, verse 14 says, Moses is saying, I'm not able to bear all these people alone because the burden is too heavy for me. So if you treat me like this, he's talking to God, please kill me here and now. If I have found favor in your sight, do not let me see my wretchedness. He says, if you love me, if I found favor in sight, you kill me right now because these people are making me crazy. And we've been there. Because he says, I can't do it alone. I can't do it alone. Well, he wasn't supposed to do it alone. So the Lord says in verse 16, the Lord said to Moses, gather to me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people. You've seen them, how they lead the people, and in officers over them. These are the people that you see leading them. Bring them to the tabernacle of meeting that they may stand there with you. And Moses like, oh, I don't have to do this, but God's like, I've already provided the other people. You just haven't asked for their help. So go get them and see. In all these cases where we think, oh God, you left me, just kill me. I can't. It's like, no, I've already got the answers. Just calm down and look around. In the very next chapter, Moses did the horrible thing of marrying an Ethiopian woman. And now they're right next to Africa. It wasn't that shocking that he married. His wife was dead. And so he marries this Ethiopian woman. And Miriam and Moses, his brother and sister-in-law, Miriam's his sister-in-law or sister? Sister. Okay, his brother and sister, I think. Anyway, I think his brother and sister. So Miriam and Aaron come up to Moses and tell him, you're not supposed to do that, because people know what your life's supposed to be. You can't do that, and you shouldn't do that, and how dare you? Because they know, they have a special relation with God of what you should be doing. And so Moses, in Numbers chapter 12, verse 13, it says, so Moses cried out to the Lord saying, so I'm sorry. So what happened is the presence of the Lord left the tabernacle. And once God leaves, Miriam becomes leprous. Um, I don't know why it wasn't Aaron and Miriam. She must have been leading the charge, and Aaron was just following along. Um, so she becomes leprous because that's what happens when God's presence leaves. Then the leprosy comes. And so in verse 13, it says, So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, Please heal her, O God, I pray. Then the Lord said to Moses, listen to this, if her father had but spit in her face, would she not be shamed 7 days? Now, that spitting thing was the way you showed your disgust at something that somebody had done. It's a thing right to this day. You know, you spit. You don't have to spit in their face, but you spit around their presence. That's showing you this is how I feel about what you did. And if her father had done that to her, then she would have had 7 days of being shamed, where you sit and you think about what you did. We used to do that. You sit in the corner and you think about what you did. Or you go to your room and you think about, and that was what you're supposed to do. It wasn't just hit and then it's over. It was, I need you to now take a time out and think about what you did wrong and how you can change. Now, if you're smart, you take advantage of the time and you think about that so that you can be different when you come out. Because if you're the same when you come out, the punishment's going to be worse. So there's a 7-day period once the father expressed his shame at what you did, that you're supposed to be by yourself and contemplate and realize, yeah, my father was right. So Moses is saying, heal her immediately. And God's saying, if her father had spit in her face, there'd be a 7-day period of shame, right? Would she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut out of the camp 7 days. And afterwards, she may be received again, because she's telling you what you should be doing, like she's the God of your life, and she's not. I am. So she needs to empty herself of that idea that she knows better than everybody else. She knows better than God what everybody should be doing.
Fall back, Miriam.
Fall back, Miriam. And sometimes we think we know because we have very strong opinions. And we read people from the book of First and Second Opinions, chapter 2. I think you should be doing this. But God is God, and we don't know what God has for the person's life. We know what our opinion is, but God, you know. So anyway, we should let Lord, you handle it. I can't handle it. And God's like, right, you can't handle it. Let me handle that. Verse 15 says, So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not journey until Miriam was brought in again. And afterwards, the people moved from Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. So God took him back to the wilderness of Paran. Okay, I got to take you back and empty you out again because you're getting full of yourselves. And I need you to not be full of yourself, but be full of me. So that's what the wilderness of Paran is all about, being emptying yourself. Okay, very next chapter. Okay, so in verse 1, it says, And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan. So he finally brings them from the wilderness. They're about to go back into Israel, right? The land that God gave Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. They're about to go, and they've been in Egypt for 400 years. And God's trying to empty them of all their Egypt habits, right? And all their Egypt perspectives and that whole death culture, and try to teach them about life. That's why he said, choose life, don't choose death. Egypt's all about death. They make pyramids because they're preparing for the other world. They're preparing for death. But I want you to choose life, all the things I have for you that are for life. So he leads them to the wilderness, empties them out. They get to Canaan. They're right on the hilltop. And he says, send me out to spy out of the land of Canaan. This is Numbers chapter 13, which I am giving to the children of Israel. So he didn't say, I'm going to try to give it. I hope to give it. Go out there, check it out. And if I'm lucky, it'll happen. He says, I just want you to spy it out so that because they haven't been there in 400 years. So you need to check it out. If you left your house alone for 400 years and came back 400 years later, send somebody inside and see if something's growing in there. And it's still your house, but you don't know who's living in there now or what's going on. So you might send somebody in just to peek in the windows and see. That's all God was talking about. You haven't been in this land for 400 years. So spy it out and see what's going on. And then I'll help you develop the strategies for taking the land. So it says, from which I'm giving to the children of Israel, from each tribe of their fathers, you shall send a man, everyone a lender among them. Verse 3, so Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of the men who were heads of the children of Israel. Of course, they came back and told Moses, hey, here's our opinion. We can't go, and they're bigger than us. And see, they were still full of themselves and their opinions, and they're still judging what God can do based on what they could do. Well, I can't fight that person, and I can't. And God's like, it's not about you. If you stand still, I'll fight your battle for you. But we often judge a situation based on what we know or where we've been or how what we think. And God's like, this is, I got this. If you just stand still, I will do it for you. So he had to lead them back to the wilderness of Paran, and it took 40 years now to empty them, before they finally came back. So the wilderness of Paran, that's what that stands for. It's the first people to go there were Hagar and Ishmael, and God had to empty them so they could see what he has. And sometimes God has to empty us, and he'll let us. Now, we don't want to build in the wilderness 40 years, but however long it takes, God will have us in the wilderness so that he can empty us. It's not punishment, but we can't see his provisions. We can't see all that he has for us as long as we're full of ourselves. So he has to get us to the point where, like, okay, I can't take, and we're just done holding on to everything that we've been holding on to, and we finally released it, and then we can hold on to what God has for us. So Genesis chapter 21, verse 20, they're in the wilderness of the Paran, and it says, and his mother took a wife from him from the land of Egypt. So his mother went and spoke for him. Your parents used to broker the deals for you, right? With the other family. And she went to Egypt because that's where she's from. She's Egyptian. She gets an Egyptian wife, brings him back to Ishmael, and they live in the wilderness of Paran, and they grow from there. And there's 300 million descendants of Ishmael alive today, and that's the area where they live in. So back to Abraham, Genesis chapter 21, verse 22. And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, that doesn't sound good. Phicol. Well, it's P-H-I, Phi, C-H-O-L, Phicol. Oh, well. So I'll say Phicol. That sounds better than what I came up with. The commander of his army spoke to Abraham, saying, God is with you in all that you do. Now, that's kind of profound statement. Hey, Abraham, everything that's gone on, God is with you. I can see that. And because now Abraham may not look at it that way. Like, oh man, there was a famine 20 years ago. And then, yeah, but God took you down to Egypt and you ended up with more than you started out with. Well, yeah, and then they took my nephew Lot and kidnapped you. And yeah, and then God protected you when you went and attacked this army that just attacked 5 cities, and you got your son back. Yeah, well then the Sodom and Gomorrah was, yeah, and God delivered your nephew. I'm saying son, I mean nephew. God delivered your nephew out of Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, then Hagar had my Ishmael had, yeah, and God's going to protect them. God is with you in all that you do, even though it looks dire. God keeps protecting you, keeps providing for you, and so it's like I want to be friends with you because you can look at the people where you can say God's hand is on that person because things just always kind of seem to work out. It can be dire, they can be down and look like they have nothing, and then God just keeps to come through. I want to be friends with that person. I want to make a covenant with that person, and that so sometimes the trial that we're going through is not for us; it's for the person who's watching us, so that they can see. Look how down they were, but look how they praised God, and then look how God delivered them. I want what they got. And so God sometimes uses our life as an example. When Jesus ran into the man who was born blind, and the disciple says, now, whose fault is it that he was born blind? Was it his mother, or did he sin in the womb? And God says, there's no fault. This happened so that the works of God may be done in him. And I must do the works of God while it's day because the night's coming. And he heals the man. This happened so people know God can kill blinded eyes. And so sometimes God puts us through something just so he can deliver us for the other people. So Abimelech is coming to him and saying, God is with you. Let us make a covenant, please. God is with you in all that you do. Verse 23 says, now therefore, swear to me by God that you will not deal falsely with me. Because remember how last time you lied and said that was your sister when she was your wife? Swear that you will not deal falsely with me, with my offspring, or with my posterity, but that according to the kindness that I have done to you, you will do to me and to the land in which you have dwelt. So let's make a covenant that will last so that because Abraham had like an army of people with him by now. He had thousands of servants. I mean, God had really blessed Abraham on purpose because Abraham was God's example of the only person at that time who was really, serving God. So he did that on purpose. He doesn't need to do that with all of us and bless us in that way and make us all billionaires to prove that he's God. But but Abraham was talking about the God. And so God had blessed Abraham in such a mighty way that this king of another country wanted to be friends with him and make a treaty with him, and that our children will be friends and our children's children will be friends, and let's make this deal. And Abraham says, okay, I swear. So this paid off in the next generation, in Genesis chapter 26, in the next generation, when with Isaac, because in Genesis chapter 26, verse 1 and 2, it says there was famine in the land, besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. So not that famine, you guys. It was a different famine, not the one in Abraham. It says, then Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. And he you know, because I have a treaty with that person. And my father made a treaty with him, and this treaty paid off. And we don't know how our treaties are going to pay off. The people that we're making covenant with, how our children might be affected by that, and others. But God will lead you sometimes to people who at the time may seem like nothing, and then they may turn into something later. But God leads you to make a covenant with that person, and you don't know what it will lead to. But certainly it saved Isaac's life years later. So they make this covenant, right? Genesis chapter 1, verse 25. We're not far from the finish line. Then Abraham, verse 25, so 21, 25. Then Abraham rebuked Abimelech because he remembered something. It says, then Abraham rebuked Abimelech because of a well of water which Abimelech's servants had seized. So Abraham had dug a well, but hadn't tended it for a while. And Abimelech's men saw this well, didn't know it belonged to Abraham, and grabbed it and said, this is our well. So he's like, okay, your people just took my well. And Abimelech, verse 26, said, I did not know who has done this thing, and you did not tell me, nor had I heard of it till today. So don't be mad at me. I didn't know. You just mentioned it just now. So, verse 27, so Abraham he made his men leave, right? Get out. That's Abraham's thing. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant, and Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. So I'm going to take these 7 ewe lambs, right? And they're for you. And then Abimelech, don't name your children crazy names because old people won't be able to say them later. Then Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs which you have set by themselves? And he said, you will take these 7 ewe lambs from my hand, that they may be my witness that I have dug this well. So this is my well, right? And therefore he called the place Beersheba, which means the well of 7, or the well of the oath. So Beer and Sheba means 7 or oath, because 7 and oath mean the same thing. That means completeness. And that's why we often say the number 7 in the Bible is used for completeness. They used it that the words were interchangeable. So when you had 7 of this or 7 of that, means that it was done. And so they named it Beersheba. So it hadn't been named anything until then. It was called Englewood until then. But now it's called Beersheba because the two of them swore an oath there. So verse 32, thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. So Abimelech rose with Phicol, the commander of his army, and they returned to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and this might be the tree that Elijah came to later. But anyway, and there called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. So this is a new name that Abraham gave to God. You're the everlasting God. And God is teaching Abraham about himself. Don't forget that when Abraham met God 25 years earlier, he didn't know who he was. God just says, just start walking and I will reveal myself to you. And he's shown him, I'm the God that provides for your needs. I'm the God that rescues you. I'm the God that redeems your children. I'm the God. He's learning all these things about God. And we learn as we grow, the more that God does stuff for us. And again, if we're rich and filthy and we don't ever need God, we don't learn that much about him. But so some things we go through are just simply so that God can teach us about him. See, I'm the God that can do this. I'm the God that can heal you. I'm the God that can do that. And so Abraham he's the everlasting God. He's the eternal God. He goes from eternity to eternity. This is the God. It finally hits him because every place he went, they had a God that they worship. It's like, no, I've got the God. You worshiping wood and stone and things that you've created. But this God, he's the one that created us. He's the everlasting God. And so that's why we worship him, because we can build things, but they won't last. But God built us, and he's the one that lasts forever. And so Abraham gets his revelation of him. And this last verse, verse 34 says, and Abraham stayed in the land of Philistines many days. So what we want to take from this is that God will lead us into the wilderness of Paran sometimes to empty us of what man has given us. Remember, Abraham gave Hagar a bunch of stuff and it ran out. But God had a well that couldn't run out. And so he will take us into a situation to empty of the stuff that we've brought in, the anger we brought in, the unforgiveness we brought in, the expectations, like with the children of Israel, had expectations for God. God, why haven't you done this? And he empties us of all that stuff finally so that we can hold on to what he has for us. He doesn't leave us comfortless. He doesn't leave us destitute. It's not like he empties us and then he walks away. Well, I emptied you. He empties us so that we can grab on, because we can't grab onto both things at the same time. That's why Jesus says you can't serve God and money. You can't grab onto both things at the same time. So you got to let go, and you can only worship one thing. And so as long as we are holding on to those are the things that we're worshiping, because we think we have to hold them tight. We can let go. Doesn't mean we never have anything, but we hold on to what God gives us and not what we give ourselves. So this lesson in the wilderness of Paran, don't freak out if you end up in a wilderness situation. Be grateful to God. Say, God, open my eyes so I can see your salvation, because it looks bad. It looks bleak. I don't see any resources, but I know that you've already been here and that you've got a well for me, that you've got something for me. So help me to just relax and open my eyes so I can see your deliverance. So thank you again for listening in today. If you're a member of Good Shepherd, sometime around 11, our pastor, who's doing great, after his seizure and all that, he's doing great. He'll be speaking at 11 o'clock. And then I'll see some of you again on Wednesday night. We're finally to that place in Daniel that Jesus has been talking about in Matthew chapter 24. We're finally there. And so hopefully we're able to put all the pieces together. And then when we read through Matthew chapter 24, we're able to see it correctly, even though so many people haven't. We want to be those who have seen it correctly. Okay, so thank you, and I love you, and I hope you have a blessed new year. Amen.